I hope very much that you'll enjoy Barry's talk. I've listened to him talk for years, and I always find him very entertaining, but then he's usually buying me a drink at the time. Once the talk's over, there will be room for questions, so if anyone has any questions for Barry, I'm sure he'll be delighted to answer them. And if you haven't got any questions for him, make some up, because you'll get crying or something like that afterwards. Once it's finished, there are copies of the books for sale just round the corner of that central aisle part. Waterstones will be delighted to take your money, hand you a copy of the book. However, his book's been selling a little better than we were expecting, and we only have 29 copies. So if anyone wishes to buy one and isn't able to, we'll be happy to take your name and address and either post it to you or arrange for you to come into Waterstones to pick it up. Once you have a copy of your book, if you want it defaced, the author will be more than happy to sit at a table just there and sign it for you. And for a very large donation, you might even personalise it. So I hand you over to someone who has travelled and done a great deal more than I ever have in my life, and I hope you'll enjoy his talk.
Well, thank you all for coming out on a Glasgow night in November. It's much appreciated. There's people from my book group, writers group, colleagues from work, family, friends of family. Thank you very much for coming out, and a special thanks to Phil Nice, star of stage and screen, who's come all the way out from London to my launch. Watch it, Phil. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Sparsile. This is the 4th book of mine that they published, and that is a dirty secret: writing doesn't pay. Okay, so you get your validation from other people, like my publishers, having the faith in my writing to take the time and effort to publish and promote it, so thanks very much. This is actually my 8th book that I've had published. I published 4 under a pseudonym of Fergus Bannon. Now, I used the pseudonym because I was working at the time, and I was desperately trying to maintain the illusion that I was an august scientist. And if people knew that I wrote racy thrillers, that would have been a difficult illusion to maintain. But I don't care now because I'm retired, but if you like racy thrillers, try the inestimable work of Fergus Bannon out. So why did I write a travel memoir? The books that I've written in the past generally came from ideas I got when I was on my far-flung travels. Like my last book, The Bamboo Cocoon, came from a journey I did in China. And I was so shocked at how quickly China had advanced since the last time I'd been there. I wanted to write about it. So I used that as the overarching theme to hang a thriller on. And the book before that, The Tethered God, came from a trip I did to Egypt with my wife. We were there soon after tourism really started again after 4 years of civil war. But the trouble was, with COVID, I wasn't doing any traveling, so I wasn't getting any ideas. And it was in fact Leslie's idea, my publisher, suggested that I write a travel memoir because I've traveled throughout my life as a student, a sailor, a scientist, and a senior citizen, and all for the purposes of alliteration, and I sometimes posted what I did on Facebook. I tried to make the posts funny and interesting, and they seemed to go down quite well. So it was a good idea to try and write a travel memoir, and that's what I did. Now, it's got to be said, I am no hero in this book. I get into all sorts of scrapes. I'm the Buxton Keaton of travel writing. In fact, I'm Laurel and Hardy rolled into one. I get into lots of fine messes. And I noticed my beloved publisher on the blurb of the book has said of my travel, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a total lack of common sense. Now that's hurtful. That's hurtful. It's true, but it's hurtful nonetheless. So, what kind of travelling have I done, which has got me into so much trouble? Now, I've tried to make the book funny. I play it a lot for laughs, but the trouble was sometimes farce turns into tragedy, and it can do it in the space of a split second. And I have seen some bad things on my travels, so I'm trying to make you laugh, but it can turn nasty very quickly. And certainly that was true when I joined the Merchant Navy. I'd just graduated, been at school in one form or another for about 18 years, and I was sick to the back teeth of it. So I gave up the academic life and I ran away to sea. And this was in the mid-1970s, and it so happened that the ships I was on took me to some of the more volatile trouble spots of the day. So I was taken to Chile just after the coup that brought General Pinochet to power. Now this was a coup in which a democratic leader was killed, effectively, and it was a Central Intelligence Agency-backed coup because this democratically elected leader had tried to nationalize the Cuban copper industry, and this offended big business interests in America, so they put pressure on the CIA to have him deposed. Now the guy who deposed him was a dreadful old military tyrant called General Pinochet, and at that time something like 50,000 Chilean people had been arrested and tortured, interrogated, and what was worse, 5,000 had been disappeared. In other words, they'd been captured, tortured, interrogated, then given some anesthetic and then flown in a helicopter 20 miles out over the Pacific and thrown over the wall, so their bodies would be eaten before they got back to the mainland. And I knew absolutely nothing about this, and nobody else in the West knew either. This was in the mid-70s, so this was before the internet was invented. There were no emails, there were no mobile phones, travel was inordinately expensive, and people just didn't know what was happening in these far-flung places until months or years later. So I was a complete ingenue. I had no idea that this was going on, which meant I couldn't really put into context some of the experiences I had. And one of them was that I had an unfortunate experience with a death squad. Now, death squad is a phrase that's commonly used now, but it hadn't even been invented in those days. People didn't understand that this was going on in many of the states in South America. So I couldn't put into context what I was seeing. And in fact, because I didn't understand what was happening, that led me later on to make the worst mistake of my life, which could have resulted in fatalities. I don't know if it did or not. Okay, so that's pretty grim. But this is probably the grimmest part of the book. I was also in South Africa at the height of apartheid, and saw some really terrible things as well. So that too is in the book. And I was in Panama when the American military gave it back to the civilian authorities, control of the canal, and it looked like there was going to be a bloody revolution. I was also on a ship that was smashed up by a hurricane in the Atlantic, and one that caught fire in the Pacific. And I'll tell you, if you're on a ship that catches fire, it focuses your mind wonderfully, because you can't just run out of the burning building, not unless you're a really good swimmer, you know. So you can imagine all this had happened to me in my early 20s, and I began to develop the aspiration to live at least until I was 30 years of age. And if I stayed in the Merchant Navy, that just wasn't going to happen. So I ran away from sea and came ashore, and I wanted a job that was indoor work with no heavy lifting. So I chose medical physics, and there's a number of medical physicists in the audience tonight. Excuse me. And the good thing about the job, or one of the many good things about the job, is it allowed me to continue travelling, and this time on expenses, to far-flung conferences. So I could travel in a much more affluent manner than I had previously, and I really enjoyed that. And when I finally retired, since then I've been able to pick off all the choicer places, the more dangerous places that I didn't get in the rest of my life. So in the book I talk about how I was nearly killed by dead cows in India, and by mountains of rice, literally, in Vietnam, how I was menaced by bears and snakes in Japan, and how I grappled with that most intractable of foes, the Japanese intelligent toilet. Now, I don't know if you know about these things, and I can't believe in the West that people don't, but even 30 years ago, I rocked up in Tokyo, I went into my hotel bathroom, and the toilet had more controls than my hi-fi back home. It had 20 different controls. And of course, all the instructions were in Japanese, which of course I'm fluent in, you know. And some of them had pictograms describing the function, and there were definitely things going up the bottom. Okay? So you had to be very careful about which controls you pressed. Now, And in fact, I pressed some wrong controls. As a result, I must have awoken its malevolent, slumbering intelligence, because it took against me for the rest of the trip. It would do things like drive the seat of the toilet to scalding heat whenever I sat down. It just didn't like me. The reason I'm bringing it up, it's a short section in the book, but I thought it was just a phenomena confined to Japan and Taiwan. But my wife and I were in a flash hotel in the Lake District, and there was one of the damn things. But at least the instructions were in English, and I think the invasive ones up the bottom had been taken out for Western consumption. But there was one notice which I could read, which I hadn't before, which was danger of electrocution. So boys, men, if you ever use one of these things, make sure your aim is true, okay? Some of the other things that I've done, I went on a paranormal investigation tour of South America with my old friend Nick Kyle, who's in the audience, so I can't diss him too much. Nick is a famous spiritualist medium, and Spirit told him to go to South America and take the narcotic ayahuasca in the high Andes of Peru to reach spiritual enlightenment. Didn't work. And to study spiritual healing in Brazil. Now, I'm a complete skeptic about these things, but I thought, two old fools ricocheting around South America, there's definitely a story in it, and there was. And it was that way because Nick is the bravest man I've ever met. And the reason he's brave is he believes so implicitly in spiritualism, he has absolutely no fear of death. And if you're going through some rough places in South America with someone who has no fear of death, believe me, you will find adventure. And some of those are described in the book. Another thing I did, again with my wife, when we went to Egypt, and there had been 4 years of civil unrest. Again, a democratic ruler had been deposed by a military man. And tourism had stopped because the insurgents were taking pot shots at the Nile cruisers with rocket-propelled grenades. And so we were one of the first lot of tourists to return. Now, when tourists return to a war-torn or a civil unrest country, they can't just go back and do what they were originally doing. They have to take short, incremental steps to try and get back to normalcy. But the trouble was, when Anne and I were there, they took a massive leap. What they wanted us to do, they wanted us to have a leisurely stroll around the centre of a town called Minya. Now, this was the centre of the Muslim Brotherhood, the insurgents, and just a few years before, the government had sent tanks in to subdue it. Now, they wanted us to go back into Minya because it's a poor country. They want Westerners' money. But the trouble was, and it was all the senior military and police who were involved in this, if even one of us had been killed by an insurgent, it would have cost Egypt hundreds of millions of dollars in lost tourist income. So the way the coppers and the military squared this circle is there was about 30 of us who were brave enough to go for a walk. We had our usual security detail of 30 coppers with automatic weapons. That's what went with us all over the place. But in addition, we had 30 plainclothes coppers, and you could tell they were plainclothes because they had pistols in their waistbands at the back. And there were rooftop police snipers on the buildings all around to keep us covered. And we had 2 dedicated SWAT teams. And I knew they were SWAT because on the side of their big black vans it had SWAT. I mean, who knew that special weapons and tactical is the same as Egyptian as it is in English? And in that way we went for our leisurely stroll, and it was the least relaxing stroll I've had in my life. So that's an example of some of the stuff that I've been doing. Now, maybe you're thinking, why does he put himself in harm's way? You know, what's wrong with this idiot? Well, I came across a quote from an explorer called Mark Jenkins, which I think really sums up my philosophy, and I'm going to read it to you. Adventure is a path, real adventure, self-determined, self-motivated, often risky, forces you to have first-hand encounters with the world the way it is, not the way you imagine it. In this way, you will be compelled to grapple with the limitless kindness and bottomless cruelty of humankind, and perhaps realize that you yourself are capable of both. This will change you. Nothing will ever again be black and white. And I think that nails it to the wall. The old cliche is that travel broadens the mind. I mean, we sit in our comfortable Western homes. We see newscasts of things happening in far-flung countries that seem cruel or ridiculous or stupid. we just don't understand. And if at least you travel, you begin to gain some insight into why people do what they do. And it's a matter of there, but for the grace of God go I, which is why I like this slightly risky travel. So what I'm going to do in a couple of minutes is I'm going to read a small 5-minute section from my book. Now, it was a case of deciding which bit I was going to read. It's full of incident and accident, this book. I had plenty of things to choose from. I thought I wouldn't do the Chile and South Africa stuff. You know, it's a nice evening. Let's not do the heavy stuff. There was a great, nice 5-minute section where I went looking for a dead body in a jungle in Cuba and found it, but I thought, no, they've just had their tea. So what I've done is I've chosen one of the more innocuous sections from the book. Spoiler alert, there is threat, but nobody gets killed or injured, okay? And this bit is also apposite because it's what happened when I did change trains in Ulaanbataar. That's how we pronounce it here, but it's actually pronounced Ulaanbataar. And I was on the Trans-Mongolian Express going from Siberia down to Beijing, and I got off in Mongolia because it's a synonym for remoteness. I thought I want to see what this place looks like. So I got off in Ulaanbataar. Now Mongolia is 7 times the size of the United Kingdom, but has a population of only 3 million. It's one of the least populated countries in the world. And half of these people live in Ulaanbataar, so it's like London having a population of 35 million. Now, why do they congregate there? Most of them live in Soviet-era apartment blocks, really grim places, because it used to be in the Soviet Union. And the rest of them live in tents. They live in what we call yurts, but what the Mongolians call jurs. Those are those cylindrical tents with the conical roofs. And they live in huge cities of these tents because they've come in off the steppes. They used to be nomadic, but increasingly they are congregating in Ulaanbataar. Now, why have they done that? Well, firstly, I would suggest it's the wind off the steppe, which takes no prisoners. It's coming straight down from the Arctic. The steppe is a huge, flat expanse of nothing apart from sparse grass. I have another more romantic notion of why they come in off the steppe, and that is because the steppe is full of ghosts. Now, I don't believe in ghosts, I'm talking metaphorically here, but the steppe was a site of some of the greatest horrors the world has ever seen because of Genghis Khan. Now, the Mongolians absolutely adore and revere Genghis Khan, but he was a really awful, bloodthirsty old bastard, you know. He led his Mongol hordes to conquer an empire bigger than the world had ever seen, and it's still one of the biggest ever. But the trouble was he came from a nomadic culture, so he had no respect for people who farmed or who built villages or who built cities. And so if he came across a city, if they didn't immediately completely surrender, he put everybody in the city to death. And it's been estimated that he was responsible for the deaths of 6% of the entire human population of that day. But the Mongols revere him anyway. So I wanted to go out into the steppes to see, I wanted to see what nothingness looked like, you know. So I hired a minibus with some other people, and we drove out on one of the few roads in Mongolia. And the first problem was the potholes, okay. Now in the UK, we call them potholes because you can fit a pot into them. But in Mongolia, they should be called VW camper van holes because you can literally put a camper van in it. It looked like the road had been shelled by artillery. So oncoming vehicles would swerve into your side of the road and you would swerve into theirs. Now you could miss the bigger potholes, but the smaller ones you couldn't. So you were continually slamming down into the potholes. And it was like your spinal cord was forced up through the base of your skull and into your brain. That's what it felt like anyway. So I'm telling you, if anybody wants to become a millionaire, train up in chiropractic and go to Mongolia. Believe me, you will make a mint. Anyway, so we went out deep into the wilds, about 18 miles or so away from the nearest place, which is Ulaanbataar. And I noticed a silver thing rising over the horizon. And it got bigger and bigger the closer we came to it, until it was revealed to be a huge statue of Genghis Khan, made of stainless steel. The size of the Statue of Liberty, so big it sat on a 3-story building and absolutely dwarfed it. It's a wonder of the world. Nobody knows about it because it's literally in the middle of nowhere. It's called the Equestrian Genghis Khan statue. Look it up if you're interested. So this statue, why was it there? Why is it where there is nobody around? And the reason is, of course, that is where Genghis Khan found a golden whip. So that's it all explained, okay? So the Mongolians, who are, poor, have built this incredibly expensive statue. And it's hollow inside. And you can walk up a staircase in the back of the horse's neck, and you can look out over an infinity of nothing. And if you turn round, there's the big stainless steel baleful eyes of the Khan looking down at you. It's really quite unnerving. But the good thing about the statue, as far as I'm concerned, is it makes the Khan look absurd. And it looks absurd because there is something wrong with the scaling of the statue. He is a big, rotund guy, and he's sitting on a little horse. And it reminds me of Don Quixote, the knight who tilted at windmills. He had a companion called Sancho Panza, who went around, a bit of a corpulent peasant, who went around on a mule. And I think that's what the Khan looks like. So I'm all for that. I'm glad it makes him look like an idiot. Anyway, so we continued further out into all this emptiness, and the night was coming in, and we needed to sleep, so we slept in a jur, or a yurt. And this extract is what happened when I spent a night on the steppe. As I say, threat, but no death or injury. I've got to read this out with one hand, excuse me. The gently rolling grassland was being broken up by small mountains emerging like wolves' fangs. On a gentle rise leading up to one set of these emerging dentures, 20-year jurs had been set up. As with all jurs, they were fabric-wrapped, circular, white, and with conical roofs from which emerged a chimney. The structures were held together by 3 blue bands that were secured to the doorframe. The doors were orange and ornately painted. Inside, the roof was held up by 2 pillars, and between them lay a stove. The jur certainly looked the part. Mongolians have spent countless generations living in jurs, so how bad could it be? As it turns out, pretty damn bad. For a start, even though the stove had a chimney, we were advised not to burn anything at night, as carbon monoxide poisoning was a distinct possibility. The last person to go to sleep had to put the fire out, otherwise everyone might wake up dead. That shouldn't have been too much of a problem, as it was May, so there was no snow. Trouble is, the wind off the steppe takes no prisoners. The waving grass doesn't seem to attenuate it one little bit. The wind bites its way through the paper-thin walls and chills you to the bone. That's me. Perhaps lying hunched up in the fetal position and covered with an avalanche of yak pelts might have kept the cold out, but modern blankets just didn't do the trick. And the evening meal hadn't helped much. The yak cheese, sour milk and yoghurt hadn't really cut it, and I'd hardly eaten a thing. Same for the Irish guy who was sharing the tent with me. He had to resort to beer to numb himself to unconsciousness. Me too. The downside of this was that in the dead of night, and when there isn't an artificial light for 20 miles, there's nothing deader than a night on the steppe, I needed to pee. And that's when I heard the wolves. They were howling away and didn't sound at all happy. Then again, there was so little to eat out here that maybe they'd had to resort to yak cheese as well. That's never going to make anyone happy. So I lay there, trying to ignore my filling bladder, while the wolves held a spirited and feral conversation. There was a toilet hut, but it was about 50 meters away, and I doubted I could find it in the dark. I did have a torch, but I thought that might be a bit of a giveaway as far as hungry wolves were concerned. In the end, and in desperation, I decided to go outside, feel my way around the back of the jur, let the waters flow, then scramble back to safety as quickly as I could. There was a sliver of moon presenting a lopsided smiley face as I lugged my swollen bladder out onto the steppe. Freezing in my jammies and accompanied by the howling of a pack of wolves, I voided copiously, a sound no doubt appreciated by my other travelling companions through their own wafer-thin walls. Relieved, I turned to retrace my steps, but froze in terror. Dark though it was, I made out a dozen even darker shapes creeping silently towards me. Already the nearest was between me and the door to the jur. It was a good job I just emptied my bladder. turning and running wasn't an option, as they'd be on me in an instant. I could try to get to another jur, but finding the door quickly in the dark would be a problem. So, like countless small, frightened creatures, since the dawn of time, I stood as still as I could and hoped the bad things would go away. This didn't work, and almost immediately they were upon me. Fur brushed across my hand. I pressed back against the jur and braced myself for the first bite. These were big downed wolves, almost up to my chest, with a pace that was slow and deliberate. And they just kept coming out of the dark. There must have been 40 or more, moving in a wave across the campsite. Were they here to eat us all? Belatedly, I realised they weren't coming at me, but rather across me, their furry backs jostling me and filling my nose with a musty, sweaty animal smell. Then one of them snorted, and I realised these weren't wolves at all. It was a herd of black yaks, and some nocturnal migration too compelling to make them deviate from their course. This had taken them right through an inconveniently placed campsite. Suddenly I realised I hadn't breathed for over a minute, and I blew out a lungful of carbon dioxide noisily. This startled the beast. The nearest one snorted and stepped away to avoid me. I took my jangling nervous system and my growling empty belly back to my bed, to the cold and to the sound of the wind off the steppe, and reflected that Mongolia would not rank high on the list of countries I might ever visit again. Okay, so the deal is now you get to ask me any impertinent questions which you like. Before I do that though, I just point out that we'll maybe be going for a drink, anybody that's interested, to the Beer Halle on Gordon Street opposite TGI Fridays. Hopefully that will be empty and could accommodate a lot of people. Okay, have at it. Ask me what you will. Come on, I dare you. Come on. Phil, oh God.
Now stand up for this one. It sounds like when you started writing this, you thought, I've got these stories, tell the stories. But you know how it works. When you get into it, you end up telling a different story, which is the story of you, and travel, and the person you are. I kind of wondered, did that happen to you? Did you get to the end of it and think, actually, this isn't just a series of things I can tell people over the pub. This is actually beginning to look a bit like an autobiography. And is there a secret story?
A secret story. Well, travel has been a big part of my life. I kind of envy armchair travellers in the sense that they're obviously contented with their lot. They don't need to put their lives on the line. I mean, people who do travel like this are like mountain climbers. They need the thrill, the proximity of death to give their life texture. So that is the kind of the subtext of this story. But they are a series of anecdotes put together. It just it makes manifest, if you want to sort of subtext, my incompetence, particularly as a sailor. As I say, I'm not a hero from this, but my life is more than just travel, I would suggest. I'm a multifaceted character, Phil, for God's sakes. Anything else? Mark.
So Barry,
I know where you live, Mark.
I'll pitch you an easy one. So it's something. Yeah, you start out painting a picture of a lot of these countries that it's not all sandy beaches and palm trees and what have you. I'm guessing your book isn't endorsed by the tourist board in any of these places. So, have any of these countries refused to give you a return visa to come back?
No, I was never caught doing anything wrong. There's quite a few places I wouldn't go back to, but no, I never got into trouble. I got into trouble, but I never really got into trouble with the law, thank God. Although Nick really tried hard to get us into trouble and succeeded, in fact.
Do you ever go for 2 weeks to Tenerife?
Yes, I mean, some of the latter journeys I've done, I have actually dragged my family along with me, and they probably don't thank me for it. But now and again, yes, we do like to go and have like 2 weeks in Madeira or something, just not to push it too far, just to enjoy it. Yeah, no, I can appreciate that as well now and again. Julie.
You said you wouldn't go back to Mongolia. Is there anywhere you would go back to, or can go back to?
Yeah, most places I would go back to. I mean, I loved Brazil, and Peru was very nice as well. India was fabulous. China, not so much. I wouldn't be too keen on that. But Japan's a fabulous country too, because it's so weird. It's different from what we're used to, but it's kind of safe at the same time. So it's bizarre and safe, exotic and safe, which is a winning combination for a country. Yeah, but not Mongolia. No, the hell with Mongolia.
But,
Robin, sorry.
It's go to the other end of the spectrum, and perhaps excluding the UK because that might be too easy. What's the most boring place you've been?
Well, the steppe is pretty frigging boring, I'll tell you. Also, Siberia, because it's miles and hundreds, thousands of miles of birch trees. There's really not much happening there. But boring countries, really boring. Some European countries I find quite boring. That's it. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say they're advertising Mongolia for holidays now.
If you want a different holiday, yes. And if you're slightly masochistic and you like your spine disarticulated, Mongolia is the place for you, I'll tell you. Absolutely.
Remember going to
Stephen, yes, Stephen, sure.
Slightly silly question. When you were writing, did you find it hard to remember all of that? Or have you noted down? Or you know you missed out bits? Or what?
Well, it was the easiest book I've ever written because I'd written up so many bits of it in the various books I'd written, and also Facebook posts, which I've been doing for many years. So it was easy to kind of correlate all this. But you do raise an interesting point. Now, this is my recollection of what happened, but a few people like Nick and also one of my sailor chums did share some of these experiences with me. So I sent them a copy of the book to make sure they would agree with it and not sue me for libel for a start. Now, strangely enough, Nick's and I's recollections of what happened in South America were slightly varied. He reckons we saw ample evidence of the paranormal. I thought we found slightly less than bugger all, to be honest. And I'm not saying that I was correct. I mean, I'm humble enough to know that, I've been telling these stories for years. They're anecdotes which you tell in the pub. And over time, you can't help but maybe change them. You see someone's reaction to certain parts of the story, and you play that up next time and play down the bits which didn't work. So when I got to writing the book, I was thinking, yes, did this happen? Or at least did it happen the way that I recall? All I can say is the best that I can recall, but I'm not going to stake my life on it being 100% correct. Oh God, Nick.
As someone who never saw a release to sign, but turned up tonight to find that I'm the subject of one of your chapters, I would just like to make clear to everyone that there was a lot more happened in Peru and Brazil than you have put into print, because we made a blood oath. And although I'm very tempted to spill the beans tonight, I won't. What I'll do is I'll acknowledge that although you're self-deprecating and you say you're not a hero, and you did run away from the ayahuasca ceremony, you also did things that I wouldn't have done, such as you went on a tourist trip through the favelas and got shot at. And it didn't seem to faze you too much, so I reckon you're braver than you make out. My question to you is, where was your bravery most tested?
Well, in the Merchant Marine, when the ship caught fire and things looked bad. And I was told to go down below decks because the crew were below decks. I was a trainee deck officer. It was full of smoke, and the mate was concerned that some of the crew might be asphyxiated and lying unconscious. So this was my moment for heroism. So I went down the stairs, I had on my big work boots, and I knocked on the doors and went in, but there was one door which was locked, and I thought, oh my God, there's a crewman asphyxiating out the side. So I braced myself, John Wayne-like, kicked the door in, rushed in, and a voice behind me said, hey, what are you kicking my door in for? There was nobody in there. That was as close as I came to heroism. Walking into the favela, that is in one chapter of the book. That was scary, yes, all the gunfire. And I shouldn't have done it, really. It was a stupid thing to do, but there you go.
Is there any stories that you wanted to be in the book that you weren't able to put in? Or is there anything?
Well, there was a word limit set on what I could write. It has to show up as 301 pages, I think, is the maximum, and then the printing costs go. So a lot of action was taken out. But you know, what the hell? I might write a few sections to go on the Sparsa website just to sort of implement the book. But yes, there was a lot that didn't go in. Yeah.
Barry, are the stories in your book all about the exciting, exhilarating, crazy stuff? Is there anything on perhaps these more boring holidays you could go?
Well, every holiday is interesting in a way. You can find amusement. It doesn't have quite the zing of some of these other stories. As I say, I had to edit it down. So the pleasanter stuff didn't make it in. You know, the stuff that we just enjoyed and it was nice didn't make it in. But I do enjoy every holiday. There's something to see if you're going abroad. Something's different. Some lesson to be learned from it, really.
Barry, your descriptive powers are very impressive. Where did you learn to write? You're a scientist for nuts.
Thank you. Well, my mother taught English literature, and she tried to make me read the classics when I was younger, and of course I resisted fiercely to the point where I even see the name Thomas Hardy and I break out in a rash, you know. But it took many years until I began to get into literature. Now, I wasn't ever trained to write, but just reading a lot of books, a lot of good books. I'm not a good writer, but reading a lot of good books at least improved my own poetry prose a little bit. But a lot of scientists are writers. It's not uncommon. To do science, you do need imagination, certainly if you're in research, and that can be applicable to literature.
How do you communicate that?
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Well, I like telling stories, so I kind of just try and make it as simple and as approachable as possible and interesting and exciting. Yeah, it's just trying to remember what it's like for a reader to read stuff. You want to try and hook them and keep them going. Yeah, but no training.
And your mum was an English teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she despaired of me, yeah. When I read Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan books, she was trying to get me to read Dickens, another one that brings me out in a rash, to be honest. But latterly, I've really got into literature, and I do that's what I really read exclusively now, good classical literature.
A couple of questions, Barry. In your travels, what's the greatest act of kindness you've either experienced or witnessed, and what's the next trip?
Well, people have shown me a lot of kindness over the years when I got into trouble. They've shown me a lot of forbearance. I don't know why they didn't keelhaul me or make me walk the plank when I was in the Merchant Navy, because I was such a terrible sailor. So no, acts of kindness have been shown to me throughout my life. My next trip will probably be one of these pedestrian ones to Madeira or something, but there's one trip I've hankered after for years, and that is to get a tramp steamer in the South Seas and go to this remote island chain called the Marquesas, because I'm a big fan of Moby Dick, Herman Melville, and Melville's first book was called Taipei, and it's where he jumped off his whaling ship and swam ashore in the Marquesas, which in those days were full of cannibals, and he spent weeks there having a riotous time, and he wrote a bestseller about it. So I would like to go to the Marquesas, and there is this one tramp steamer which supplies this island chain, remote island chain, the only thing that does with various things, and they've got some cabins on board, so they do take passengers. So I'd like to do it, but it is phenomenally expensive, and that's the only reason that stopped me doing it. But the next trip, God knows what it'll be, but it'll be something more pedestrian than that. Okie doke. Good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Barry, thank you very much. That was very entertaining and very informative, which is astonishing because he isn't normally either. I would recommend his book to everyone. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm 3/4 of the way through it, and it's a lot better than I expected, and I was expecting quite a lot because I was the editor on his previous work of fiction and the one before that. So I would highly recommend his experiences in Egypt, but told from a completely different point of view, i.e. that of a dog who used to be a pharaoh, or his experiences in China, which are documented through 4 generations of a family who end up turning into spies. They're just not quite sure who for. Wonderful speaker, thank you very much. I would highly recommend this latest book to you. Once again, if anyone wishes a copy, they're for sale from Waterstones just round the corner, and then Barry will be sitting at a chair there. We'll be more than happy to sign them for you. As I've said, we unfortunately have sold more copies than we expected, and we only have 29 copies for sale. But anyone who wants a copy, please let us know. We'll take note of your name and address, and either you can come in to pick it up here, or we can have them arranged to have them posted to you. And obviously I would immediately think that from the time of year you should all probably put in an order for at least 100 copies each, because they make wonderful Christmas presents. And obviously, and you'll want one copy to keep for good and one to read for yourself. So once again, thank you very much to Barry for a very entertaining evening. Thank you.